Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where I have Jay Hardman, who's the Executive Director, and Clint Seneca, who is the President of the Board of Directors for the Greater Baton Rouge Port Authority. They're going to talk to us about the port here in Baton Rouge and why it's so important not only to Baton Rouge but for surrounding parishes. It manages the Mississippi River and the Intercoastal Canal, the great crossroads for transportation of everything we use. So join us on the next Legal Lines. We're discussing the Greater Baton Rouge Port Authority. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're going to talk about the law and you and why it should matter to you what a law is. You know, in America, in our cities, in our states, in our federal governments, they all pass thousands, hundreds of thousands of laws, regulations every single year, and they either directly or indirectly affect you. That's why you need to know what a law is. It's an exercise of power over people, places, and things. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. I'm very pleased to have on the show for the very first time Clint Seneca and Jay Hardman. Gentlemen, thank you so much. You guys head up and run the Baton Rouge Port Authority, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So most folks probably ask the same question I did. What does that mean, and what does the Port Authority do?
Sure. The Port Authority is a political subdivision of the state of Louisiana. Got 84 miles of jurisdiction on the Mississippi River.
And I understand that's both sides.
That's correct, both East Bank and West Bank of the parishes of West Baton Rouge, East Baton Rouge, Iberville, and Ascension. And we facilitate maritime commerce to give our local and regional shippers a competitive advantage.
And so those four parishes that you just listed, those are part of the makeup of the board, as I understand it, because the river literally traverses through parts of those parishes?
That's correct. That is our jurisdictional area, and our governing body, the Board of Commissioners, are comprised of people appointed by the governor to serve on that commission.
Okay, and we'll go into the kind of the way it's controlled in a minute, but explain to folks why the Port Authority is so important to Baton Rouge and the surrounding parishes.
Not only is the Mississippi River important to those local parishes in the state, it's also important to the nation. The Port of Baton Rouge is a gateway to world marketplaces for both import and export. Louisiana, being of strong agricultural nature, exports a tremendous amount of agricultural products.
Tons of chemicals too.
Tons of chemicals on the petroleum side, and that is the avenue for them to reach the world markets.
And so, and I think we have what, the second or third largest refinery capacity in the nation and maybe the world?
That's correct.
Amazing.
And that's very important to them as well, not only from a public perspective, but there's a lot of private entities located in our jurisdictional area and along the Mississippi River that rely on it.
And so, as I understand it, that 85 miles begins right before Exxon's docks along the river, is that right?
Good demarcation point is the 190 bridge crossing to the north, and the Sunshine Bridge crossing to the south is good physical demarcation points of the Port of Baton Rouge jurisdictional area. And
you brought up the old Huey Long Bridge, which is the old one that we see in the distance, kind of rusty sometimes. You know, always an interesting story we heard, and I think you've debunked it for me, but the governor back then actually built it low to the river so that folks would have to deal with Baton Rouge.
Well, it keeps deep draft shipping from going further north. And you throw in the issue with the core dredging. Deep draft shipping on the Mississippi River, 45 feet draft, ends at the 190 bridge crossing.
And so maybe it did serve a purpose?
I think it was a fairly effective purpose.
I notice it's still there, so
it's still there and getting a new paint job, so I think it's going to be there for a while.
Not going anywhere.
So the depth of the river is a big deal. Explain to folks why.
Depth of the river, especially on the deep draft side, is important. Right now authorized to 45 feet.
Who authorizes that?
Authorized by Congress to be maintained by the Corps of Engineers. And so at times you see in the paper the dredging issue, not only that the Port of Baton Rouge faces, but all of our deep draft ports on the river. It's important because if it's shallowed up from there or less than 45 feet, these ships can't load out to their full capacity. And I think various studies that have been done, for every foot of draft that's lost in the river, it costs the nation millions and millions of dollars. That's correct.
Is it that interesting?
So, and one of the initiatives that were undertaken and Clint here with us on the commission has heard us speak about deepening the river to
Right,
50
and
feet, and you've read some of that.
Yeah, I
in the
read
paper.
something about how the Panama Canal is undergoing a similar type of revisions where they're widening it, as I understand
Sure.
it, and making it deeper. So you get these bigger, heavier, longer,
As with
wider
trucks,
ships.
as anything, all that's getting bigger, and it requires more water to float it.
Okay, so I've heard that y'all are now trying to get authorization and financing to dredge the river so it goes down to 50 feet?
So you'll have a draft of 50 feet. So take the, so ensure a draft of 50 feet. Authorization.
Define draft for folks.
Draft being how big of a ship you can float. Draft being a ship drafting 45 feet needs about 50 feet of water.
Okay, so it's literally like an iceberg, the part underneath the part we see above
That's
the
right.
water. It's
When
45 feet deep.
When you see one of these ships on the river drafting 45 feet, you've got about a 4-story building underwater.
Remarkable.
So just to give you some idea of the volumes that they can carry, river's been authorized to 50 feet. It's a funding issue to get it down to 50. There needs to be a contribution from both the state and the federal government to ensure that happens.
So the river is regulated and controlled by both our federal government and our state government?
Mainly controlled by the federal government. The Mississippi River Commission has been tasked, presidential appointees to oversee the care and operation of the Mississippi River from a navigational standpoint.
And I can understand why the feds would be involved, because as I understand it, the river services, what, 32 states?
And a couple Canadian provinces, if you want to throw those in.
And
That's
so
correct.
does that mean it's literally going so far up into the heart of America that it is somewhere along the line touching 32 states?
That's correct.
And even
Yeah,
into
and that's
two.
why it is one of the largest port complexes in the world, with 450 to 460 million tons of cargo traversing it every year.
But out of those 32 states, only one, the state of Louisiana, has a depth deep enough that these big boy vessels can come up.
That's correct.
Okay, so once you hit Huey
190.
Long's Bridge, that's it. What type of traffic goes up and uses the river above, north of Baton Rouge?
Shallow draft, barge traffic. Barge drafting 12 to 15 feet.
Okay.
And a lot of those, a lot of people here in Baton Rouge don't see them because of the levee. They are traversing in massive tows every day, hauling everything from liquid bulk commodities, scrap, cement, grains, ore, coal. It really is the water highway of the U.S.
So the bottom line is the river is a huge component of the authorities' jurisdictional control, maintaining it and keeping it running. But there are other waterways that you guys kind of keep tight and working well. Explain what those
you
are.
have the Atchafalaya River. You also have the Intercoastal Waterway, which the northern entry point to that is just right south of the I-10 bridge going to the west. There's the entrance point. A lot of people know the Port Allen locks at that location. You go down through Bayou Sorrel, get into the Atchafalaya, work your way all the way inland waterway system over to Brownsville, Texas, and then to the east down in New Orleans, takes you, as we had discussed, through
All the way to Florida.
Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, all the way over to Jacksonville.
So again, we are literally the crossroads from north to south along the Mississippi River, and then from west to east
Of the Intercoastal.
of the Intercoastal Canal, and they both cross right at little
Well,
old Baton
the
Rouge.
northern entrance at Baton Rouge, southern entrance or eastern entrance down in New Orleans.
And then the other beauty of this is, for transportation purposes, we have the two major interstates close by,
Yes.
many others,
Certainly.
and then we also have the railroad tracks.
That's correct.
So the big power of the Port Authority and the big duty and responsibility it has is to ensure transportation in an economical, orderly, safe fashion on all of those thoroughfares.
Well, certainly, and to meld them together and to bring in that maritime component.
And so I know that we've talked about kind of the big picture of this. Let's discuss on the next segment how the day-to-day operations take place.
Okay.
We'll be right back. This is Locke Meredith with the Executive Director and the President of the Board of the Port of Authority for Baton Rouge. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're going to talk about you and the law. You know, a law is nothing but an exercise of power over you, people, places, or things. But where does that power come from? Where does the government get that power? and how is that power exercised, and do you play a role at all? That's what you need to know. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I have a unique show today. We're talking to the authorities that help us regulate the crossroads of the Mississippi River with the Intercoastal Canal. It's called the Greater Baton Rouge Port Authority. Gentlemen, let's dive right back in. Clint, you are the president of the board of directors that helps manage and guide the Port Authority.
That's
Explain to folks basically what the board does.
The board, the staff comes to the board with recommendations on budget, projects or whatnot, brings their recommendations to the board, and the board approves or disapproves.
What is the makeup of the board? How many members do you have on the board?
We have 15 board members.
Okay, and how are those 15 board members chosen? Do they run for elections, or how does that take place?
No, it's a nomination by the legislative organization, your local legislation, and your local senator brings the nomination to the governor, and the governor signs off or doesn't sign off on the approval.
Okay, and as I understand it, that y'all serve, the term is at the pleasure of the governor.
Absolutely.
Which means there's no term.
No term.
You're not there for a year or 6 years or 10 years. You're there for as long as the governor thinks you're doing a good job.
That's exactly right.
And we talked about it, the governor, even though you serve at his pleasure, you guys on the board are nominated by, I guess it's the parishes that
Comprised of our jurisdictional area. That's
okay,
correct.
so that would be again West Baton Rouge, East Baton Rouge, Iberville, Ascension.
And then plus 2 Farm Bureau appointees.
Okay.
From East or West Bank.
Now, what is the reason for the Farm Bureau?
Port of Baton Rouge has been steeped heavily in agricultural commodities.
Okay,
and
that makes sense.
Therefore, the nexus there with Farm Bureau.
Now, what was the, as I understand it, the Port Authority didn't always exist. It's really only been in existence for less than, what, 70 years?
60 years, celebrated our 60th birthday, was enabled as an agency of state government, much like DOTD, Department of Health and Hospitals, rewrite of the Constitution in '74, gave the port, brought the port into existence as a political subdivision of the state, much like a town or parish, and then the governing body then being nominated by the legislative delegation of the parishes we serve and appointed by the governor.
Okay, but when it's all said and done, it's part of the executive branch of our government.
That's correct.
Of our state government.
That's correct.
But the local parishes
Influences.
get to participate in the decision.
That's correct.
Okay, and so they'll nominate, is it one person for the position or multiple?
Typically three, and the governor picks.
Okay.
And then Senate Committee of Governmental Affairs has a confirmation process on the pick.
Okay, so Clint, explain to the folks how a decision is made. I mean, is it, as I understand it, y'all have committees and then you have the whole board of the 15 folks.
We do.
So explain how the committees vote and what it is they contemplate.
Well, we have an engineering committee, a finance committee, and an executive committee.
Okay.
And they're all the different agendas for each committee. And then whatever, if it's engineering, the engineering committee will go through it, bring a recommendation to the full board, and the full board will approve or disapprove of.
And is the vote a majority wins? I mean, if okay.
Yes, majority
And
wins.
as I understand it, you don't really always vote.
Only on a tie.
Okay, so you're the tiebreaker. You're like the vice president of the United States of America in
Right.
Congress. I got it.
I'll run the meetings and make sure everything goes straight in the meetings and vote on the tie.
Okay, so I guess that would be kind of like the technical committee, because engineering is not something everybody can do. So the board members that are on that particular committee, they have expertise in engineering?
They
generally?
do, and the president chooses who he wants on which committee, and depending on each person's expertise, that's which committee they serve on.
Got it. So you're the one that chooses the makeup of each of the committees?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. And then the finance committee, what I guess they're just dealing with how we get money in here, what is it, and how we're going to spend it?
Budget, yeah.
Okay. And then finally you said there's the executive committee. Who is that made up of?
The executive committee, the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer of the board, which is elected by the 15-member board.
Okay. So each of those positions are, there's a nomination process or an election where the full board votes on who they want to be president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer.
That's right. You need
Excellent.
a nomination, and then the board votes on each position.
Okay. What is the makeup of each of the committees? Is it 3 folks, 5 folks? How is that determined?
Determined by the president.
Okay. So it's not a set amount of folks based on some statute somewhere?
No.
Okay, excellent. All right, so tell me how you guys, I guess, interact with Jay's group, which basically runs the show on a day-to-day basis. How do y'all communicate with each other and make decisions?
We communicate by phone. I speak to Jay 2, 3, 4 times a week on things that's coming up with the port. If we need to know about it, he'll tell me what's going to be on the agenda. Most months we go through the agenda.
How do y'all get educated on the issues coming before the board? Is that part of Jay's responsibilities?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so kind of, as I understand it then, part of the governor's executive branch, you got 15 folks represented by the parishes in the agricultural group. You have subcommittees that deal with the basic issues that are confronted with the Port Authority all the time. Jay and his people who run the day-to-day operations kind of tell y'all what the issues are and what needed decisions are, and that's the way it works from the big picture kind of.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's right.
Good understanding.
So explain how the day-to-day operations run, where the rubber hits the road too. I imagine that's not always very smooth.
They run smoothly all the time,
right.
but you know, a lot of the day-to-day operations go into maintaining the infrastructure that we own, that is publicly owned infrastructure in that regard, trying to maintain it, get more life out of it, preserve it. And then you have on the commercial side of looking for and trying to develop and acquire new tenants that need a maritime
Interesting,
component.
because you're selling a service and
Selling
a
infrastructure,
product.
that's correct. And so in an effort to try to keep, we do a lot of engineering work. The port is an engineering intensive type of environment of trying to maintain roads, bridges, rail track, docks, water systems,
Cranes,
fire process, cranes,
everything.
et cetera. A lot of that is a day-to-day operation, and the board oversees an operating budget for that. And then as we have and move in on the commercial side, on the business development side of having a new tenant, looking at what their needs are, can we help them somehow capitalize their needs so that they can move commodities and products.
So what kind of staff do you have? I imagine you got to have folks that focus in different areas and
Probably
different
about
specialties.
10 people of administrative staff, myself included, and then probably another 20 or so people that work out in our facilities of just attempting to maintain them in that regard. We maintain about 20 miles of rail track, a water system that rivals a small municipality on a fire suppression side. A lot that goes into the day-to-day operations of the port.
And the revenues generated by the port annually are what?
Somewhere varying between $6 to $7 to $8 million generated off of fees for the utilization of those assets.
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment.
Okay.
This was Locke Meredith with the Executive Director and the President of the Board for the Greater Baton Rouge Port Authority. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're talking about the law and you. The law is nothing but an exercise of power by a government over you. But because our framers in our Constitution knew that power could be abused and corrupting, they chopped up power between the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary, and you. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Ready? Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm very pleased to have on the show for the first time Jay Hardman. He's the Executive Director, and Clint Seneca, who is the President of the Board of Directors of the Greater Baton Rouge Port Authority. Gentlemen, let's dive right back in. So the revenues, roughly $6-7 million, are generated every year. Net assets of over $70 million, as I understand it?
84.
Okay, wow, 84 million, okay. And so how do you go about deciding where you're going to spend money, where you're going to invest money, all of those type of decisions?
Like it's a process, and certainly on the maintenance side of things, you look at the assets that are being heavily utilized, and that's where a lot of the budget goes to keep those in working order. And then on the capital side, we've got a project underway right now that the board has been very supportive of revitalizing our deep water docks. The ships, as you know from the discussion on the Panama Canal, are getting bigger.
Right.
We're putting a lot of money into those docks that were built, the first one back in the late 50s, to make sure it can handle the size and the depth that those big ships will be bringing in that regard. So there's maintenance, and also on the capital side of where to try to keep improving so that we can remain competitive in handling these bigger vessels.
So even though we're at the crossroads, literally of east and west and north and south, we got competition and we got to keep up.
Well, you have competition, and you also have a need for the private sector to be able to utilize these facilities, much like our highway systems. You don't see roads getting any narrow or any, they're getting where they can handle bigger trucks and longer trucks, and the same thing takes place on the maritime side.
So for industry changes.
That's correct. And to remain competitive and to keep the flow of these goods moving in a competitive fashion, that's what you have to do.
Well, let's talk about the success of the port, because I think we've mentioned, but what is it, 9th or 6th in terms of total tonnage that comes through the port?
That's correct. The Port of Greater Baton Rouge, the 5 deepwater ports in the U.S., 6 deepwater ports in the U.S. probably rank, 3 or 4 of them rank in the top 15 of the ports in the U.S., and probably in the top 35 of the ports in the world. So a lot of cargo moves through. We have had a lot of success, and a lot of that success has been brought on due to the private sector, realizing those assets can be important to them and offer them a competitive advantage. With that, we've conveyed to the Commission of where we need to spend our funding to remain competitive. Since Mr. Seneca's been on the board, the assets of the port have grown by 20%.
Wow.
Our tonnage, as you've known, have gone up in that regard, and I think probably within the next couple of years, the port tonnage-wise will probably be ranked easily in the top 10.
So how does the port make money?
Really 3 ways, and it's not very complicated. We make money off of the revenues we generate from the fees for the utilization of the assets that we have, either rail tracks, docks, land leases.
So facilities you own that...
That's correct. Or private sector entity comes in and needs to utilize those assets and would like to set up shop. We have available land that we can lease them to put their facilities in. We look for those facilities to have a maritime component in that regard.
Interesting. So like, say the gambling boats, are those facilities that y'all own that y'all are leasing?
No, those are private sector owned. But if you have somebody like Drax, company out of Great Britain, that came in and wanted to export wood pellets, manufacture and export wood pellets, we leased them a facility, and they handle their cargo and move it through our docks.
Got it.
So back to your question, land leases, dockage, when ships touch our docks, vessels touch our docks, and a throughput on cargo.
Interesting.
We're proud to say that we do not have a tax base. We do not have an ad valorem tax or a sales tax. We do get capitalized, and very thankful for it, through the state's legislative process.
Meaning they give y'all money.
Capital outlay for projects, as well as the Port Priority Program.
Which is a recognition of how valuable an asset the port is to the state.
We try to utilize those funds very effectively.
Talk to me about the cargo, because it ranges from very finished products, all nice and packaged and everything, to the rawest materials or the most dangerous chemicals.
I think that we're an envy of a lot of ports in the diversification of our cargo
It's
base.
remarkable.
It is. Huge, diverse agricultural cargo base from our regional farmers. I mean, sugar, at times rice, grain seeds, molasses. And then you look on the petroleum side, everything from raw petroleum products to finished petroleum products, plastics, a whole host of project cargoes.
Timber? I saw them loading monstrous poles in those huge barges.
Pellets, you bet. So a nice diversification of cargo that smooths out the ups and downs typically of the marketplace.
And so to be able to handle this huge array of cargo, you have to have the ability to handle it, which means a crane or a certain specialized piece.
Liquid bulk terminals,
grain
dry
elevators.
bulk terminals. That's correct.
Fascinating. All right, well, let's shift gears to kind of a somber issue, and that's security. You know, Colonel Mike Edmondson, he's the superintendent of state police, and I've discussed many times how we and little old Baton Rouge are on the top of the list, or certainly in the top 5 or so on the list of terrorist targets. So, and one of the reasons is because of the port. How do we deal with that?
Locke, we've done quite a few things in that regard. One, I think that's been established, and certainly Colonel Edmondson played a big part in that, as well as our local sheriff's departments in these jurisdictional areas.
Sid Gotro and the various other?
Sid Gotro, Mike Kaz,
all the parish sheriffs?
All the parishes, Bud Torres, et cetera, Wiley down in Ascension, to bring together great communication amongst these first responder groups. The federal government, from their perspective, has funded through the Port Security Grant Program, which these 5 deepwater ports on the river have taken advantage of, and a consortium, a joint ownership of trying to protect this waterway, both in vetting of the crews of these deep dive vessels before they come in.
Well, Jay, you were rattling off all the things that y'all do to make sure that we're safe. So
we could talk
do
3 or
it. No,
4
but do it.
shows on that.
I mean, the folks that come via the ships, y'all make sure before they ever touch the soil.
The Coast Guard does, and before they come
Coming into the river.
That's right. There's a declaration of security at the docks with Customs and Border Patrol being there. Then you start looking at all the hardware, the cameras, the access control that goes into place like a port, not only at public facilities, but even our private sector partners who have private facilities on the river have got incredible security.
Well, and that's one of the other factors that Colonel Edmondson pointed out, that we have some of the largest refineries in the world.
That's correct.
And one of the venues of attack would be via the river.
The waterway, that's correct. And I think that you hear a lot about federal programs, but I can say from where I sit, I think the federal government has done a good job of helping us fund some of those improvements and policies and procedures that have gone into place.
So, gentlemen, tell me what y'all see for the future of the port here in the next few years.
Mr. Seneca's heard us talk a lot about planning for the future, property acquisition, growth. We've got a company that has just recently located on the port, Genesis Energy.
So you literally try and get folks to come from all over the nation and the world to set up shop here because you have this asset to
That's
sell.
correct. There's a maritime component, and that spills into economic development on the land side, pure and simple.
And I read billions of dollars in revenues generated for the state, and 1 out of 8 jobs in Louisiana is somehow related to
Probably tied to the maritime industry.
Jay Hardman, thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Clint Seneca, thank you.
Thanks for having
Ladies
us.
and gentlemen, this was a show on the Greater Baton Rouge Port Authority, and now we know why they're here. Thank you.